Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to another episode of Let's Make a First-Person Shooter in Unity 3D. And in this episode, I've got Blender open because we want to make it look like our person is shooting a gun, and for that, we are going to need a gun. It's going to be a very simple gun. Frankly, it's going to look like it's made out of kind of a styrofoam or tubing or something like that, just because it's meant to be a placeholder. But yeah, so I've loaded up Blender. I am on Blender 2.70 at this point, which shouldn't change much from most versions other than tabs over there, so it should be pretty much the same. I've gone ahead and deleted everything. I've done that by hitting A to select everything. You can, A will select everything or deselect everything, depending on what you've got, and then just hitting delete to get rid of the scene. So I've got a nice empty scene over here, and yeah, you can follow what I'm doing over in the bottom left corner. So I'm just going to hit Shift A to add a cube. Again, this is going to be very, very rough and simple. Now, by default, this cube, it says radius, which is kind of weird, is a 2 by 2 by 2 cube, and those are in meters, so that's way too big. I think we're going to want to do, what, 1/10 of that? Which would bring us to about a 20 centimeter long gun, which seems reasonable. So we'll do that, and then we'll zoom in. So I just changed the dimensions over there, and there is our cube. So I'm going to go into the side view. I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, and I'm going to hit Z to go into wireframe mode. If you're not in wireframe mode, then you can't necessarily edit the stuff that's hidden. And so this will just ensure that things behave okay. And I'm just going to block something out that's roughly gun shaped. Now, in the center of the model here, the 000 point, I'm going to try to make that the bit where the gun sort of handle meets the gun top. But what do I want to do first? Well, first of all, I'm going to consider the length this way to be okay, about 20 centimeters. But I'm going to bring the gun a little bit more narrow this way. And I guess we'll bring everything over to the right. And again, I'm just blocking things out very roughly. So I'm doing Control R here for a loop cut. I'm going to bring the loop cut back to here. I'm going to grab everything on the bottom. I'm going to extrude downwards. And that, oops, our width is way too wrong. So I'm going to grab everything here, hit S to scale, and I'm going to do it in the Y axis by hitting Y and bring it down. And look at that. There is our gun. Isn't that lovely? You know, I hope everyone is happy with that. Tell you what, you want to put in a trigger? No, we're not going to put in a trigger. We're just going to leave it exactly like this. This is our placeholder pistol. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to hit Control S to save. And I'm going to find the actual project, including my little false starts over here. Episode 17 is what we're on. Assets, player stuff? Here, let's make a gun stuff folder. And we're going to save this as, this is the placeholder pistol. Like that. All right, so now if I pop back into Unity, that should be successfully imported in a folder called gun stuff, and there it is. Now, if for any reason Unity's having trouble importing your Blender file. Now, this doesn't seem to be a problem on the latest version of Unity or the latest version of Blender, but there is some combination of the two where if you are in edit mode, right? If I hit Tab and I'm in edit mode right now, and I were to save the file here, sometimes that will cause Unity to not be able to correctly read your pistol. Keep in mind here that Blender creates backups automatically, which is what this bit is. This is my actual blend file. So in whatever the version of Unity or version of Blender that I'm running, it's fine. But if that for some reason you can't, make sure you're in object mode, which is what this is. You toggle back and forth with Tab. All right. So anyway, we have our gun. Great. It's a beautiful gun. It's exactly the sort of high quality product that we've come to expect from our game here. So I'm going to drop the player controller back in the world. And we're going to zoom in on him. And so what we want to do at this point is we want to attach the gun to his hand. All right, so that he is holding the gun. Now, we are going to want to do a couple of different things here. If I go into the character and I keep going down. Now, this bit here, this is the actual mesh that gets rendered, right? If I toggle that on and off, that's the mesh. Everything else up here, these are the bones that are used for animation. But we actually want to attach our gun to the bone for the right hand, because this is the thing that's going to move around. So anything that's attached to the right hand bone will move as the character jumps and swings his arm around, right? In which we did in the last video. We have his arm swings up and down as he aims. So we want to attach the pistol to this hand. Now, at this point, I could go ahead and drag and drop our pistol model, wherever I put that, gun stuff, our pistol model, onto his right hand, and that would sort of vaguely work. However, I don't want to do that directly. The reason is I want to be able to swap weapons at some point in the future, and I want to do that simply by replacing one sort of model with another. right? Visually speaking, that's what I want to do. And it's going to take a little bit of fiddling to get the gun to be lined up properly with the hand. In Blender, I just want to do this. I just want to like draw all my guns so they're basically facing upwards, and that's all there is to it. So what I want to do at this point is I want to create an empty game object. Just pull down my inspector. I'm going to take this object, I'm going to attach it to the hand. And by default, I'm going to go ahead and just like zero everything out in terms of position. And I'm going to call this like the weapon holder, I guess, if we're going to be descriptive, right? This is the bit that holds the weapon. And now I'm going to go and attach my pistol, which I've lost once again, my placeholder pistol, to the weapon holder. Now, obviously, it's not positioned correctly, but my pistol itself, I don't want to mess with its position or rotation in any way. That -90 is in there because of the way that it's been imported from Blender, so that's fine. I just want to leave everything the default. Instead, I want to go to the weapon holder object, and this is what I want to move and rotate. So I'm going to take it and, I guess, what is it? In the y-axis, we want to do a 180 like that, so it's facing that direction. And I'll go and hit, the hotkeys over here, by the way, for these different tools is Q, W, E, R. So like W will use this move tool and E will flip to rotation. It's very handy. And R to scale, but I don't find I do that very often. So W, so I'm going to move it forward and then I'm going to rotate, I guess, is it 90 degrees in the X? Oops, -90 in the X. And then I'm going to, what have I done? Did my player move? How did I lose my view? Redo. Redo? Okay. Sorry. All right. I don't know what happened there. My bad. So I'm going to grab this. I must have accidentally moved the camera over. That can happen when I switch back and forth between Unity and Blender. The other thing, if you want to be able to rotate around a camera, an object like I do, what you do is you select the object and then hit F, which will focus your camera on it, right? It'll zoom it in, but it'll also put that as the origin. And you have to make sure that you're in isometric mode. If you're in perspective mode, holding down the right button rotates the camera around itself. But if you're in isometric mode, it'll rotate around the focal point, which is what happens when you hit F on an object. So it'll rotate around that. And I find that very, very handy to position stuff like this. Anyway, let's go to the top view over here. We're going to bring the gun down that way. We'll go forward, drag it down, check this view over here. And that's looking pretty good. I think when he closes his hand, he'll be properly holding our little pistol. I mean, we stick into the thumb and, you know, that's a little rough, but yeah, maybe we'll do that. I think it's going to be, I think that's fine. Probably want a thinner gun, but we're going to call that good enough. And to see if it works, we're going to go to our player controller. I'm going to apply the changes. Don't forget to do that. Then I'm going to remove this player controller because, again, that's the fake one. Go into single player mode, find this dude over here, and I am holding the gun. You can see it is attached to my hand. And now it looks like I've got an actual pistol. Ah, all right. So next problem. Obviously, the bullets are still coming out of our forehead. So let's go and do something about that. Let me grab my player controller and drop it back in here. And we're going to take a look at our character structure once more. Everything's still recording. Timing's good. Excellent. All right. Right shoulder, right arm, right arm. And again, if you want to do a lefty, then attach it to the other end. And weapon holder. So we've got this weapon holder, and then we've got this weapon model on it. Now, where specifically do we want the bullet to come out of? Well, we want it to come out of the tip of the gun. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to create another empty. And this empty is going to go and attach itself to this pistol. So as I swap in different weapon models, I can have a different empty. And this will be, I'm going to call this the fire point. All right, this is the point where the bullet actually comes out. And I'm just going to line it up so it's at the tip of my pistol. Oh, that's pretty much where I want it to be, right there. And, ooh, it is, normally the Z is the forward axis. So what I should probably do at this point is do a 90-degree turn that way. Why did I not do anything? Oh, right. Yeah, because these axes are not the local. There we go. Local axis. No, -90. There we go. So, because again, look over here, the Z-axis in positive direction is what the blue arrow is. And so the blue arrow is now coming out of the front of the gun. So that way we'll be able to say the fire points forward axis based on its transform, that's where we want the bullets to come out facing. And that's pretty good. Now, how are we going to find this fire point? So I'm getting ahead of myself. Once again, I'll apply these changes. I won't get rid of this player controller yet because we're going to need it. Let's go and see how we shoot guns. So on our player controller, we have a player shooting script right over here. I'm going to pop that bad boy open. Now, when we shoot, come on, mono develop, you're loaded. Why are you doing this to me? Why is mono develop so bad on Windows? Let me tell you something. When you use Unity on the Mac, you are going to have a much nicer, I'm just doing a force quit over here. You're going to have a much nicer experience than using mono develop on the PC. Let's try that once again. Open up. Are you kidding me? There we go. Whew, all right. I was getting really nervous there. Okay. So yeah, mono develop on the PC can be really wonky, I find. So here's our player shooting script. So let's review. In the update, which runs every frame, we check to see if we're holding down the shoot button. If so, we shoot. In here, we fire a ray from our camera. This is a first-person shooter, so we are firing a ray directly from our camera's position in the forward direction to see what we hit. What is basically exactly in the middle of the screen under our crosshairs. And that's exactly how we want things to work from a gameplay point of view. It makes perfect sense. So we do that, we find out what we hit, and then we do some health, and we apply some damage, and yada, yada, yada. In terms of the visual effects, we hit that right over here. We kind of have a little bit of redundancy in that we call this twice with slightly different parameters. But what we do is we calculate, we know what we hit, which is this hit point. This is when we're hitting an actual object. This example over here is we're just picking a point in space 100 pixels in front of us. But the actual function call exactly the same. We could probably restructure it so we don't actually have two separate lines, but let's pretend that's fine. Actually, we could probably put this out to a little function. You know, maybe we should do that. Okay, let's do that. We're going to call it do gun fx, and we just pass it a hit point to say where we're going to hit. So we're going to have that both, and then we're going to remove this, and we're going to cut that, and we're going to have a function called void do gun fx, and it's just going to have this little one-liner there. That way we're no longer duplicating our code. Wonderful. So what is going to change? Well, right now we shoot our gun effects. If we load this up, whoops, we want a vector 3 like that. Remove that. Come on. And I suppose if I'm going to run the game, I got to get rid of this player controller. Once again, I'll make sure I've applied everything and just remove that and then hit play. And if I find myself in the game world, there I am, and I shoot, right? So we've got that sort of line and a little bit of a particle effect that comes out of the forehead because it's originating here at the camera transform position. Now, the actual gameplay bullet really does come out of the middle of our camera, but the visual of our bullet should not do that. So we want it to come out of, again, that fire point that I talked about. So how do we find the fire point? Because that's what we have to do. We have to, this function to our FX manager, we want to tell it that it's fire point dot transform dot position, right? Something to this effect. This code won't run, but that's effectively what we want to do is say, make it come out of this thing. Where are we? Weapon holder, fire point. Make it come out of this thing and shoot that way. So one thing you might think of is, well, let's just look for the object called fire point. Now, normally you would do that with something like gameObject.find, and then pass it a name called fire point, and this will return the game object, you know, geo, called fire point. If there's more than one, it'll just return the first one that happens to find with that name. And therein lies the problem. Every player is going to have a fire point. Now we could do things like delete them or turn them on and off, depending, on network characters. And that's just sounding like a lot of work. Well, here's the other side of it. We are shooting from our player, so we just want to find our own fire point. How do we do that? How do we do a find within ourselves? Well, you might be tempted to do something like transform.find. You also see find child. Now, find child is technically deprecated, and what find child does is just an alias for find. These two things do exactly the same. And there we can pass in a name as well, like fire point. You're like, aha, this will search my children for an object called FirePoint. That's sort of true. The problem is it only finds direct children. Because the script exists on player controller, I could use this to find the child called main camera or a child called soldier, but that's where it stops, or soldier military male LOD1. But that's where it stops. It doesn't go down any further. Now, you can sort of do it the other way, where if you did something like we did soldier slash hips slash spine slash so on and so on and so forth, and then yeah, you could eventually reach FirePoint that way. Now, unfortunately, if ever you change your hierarchy, if you bring in a new model, that would break everything there as well. Okay, so what's if we don't have a find that searches through all of our children for something with the name, and I might be wrong, I may have like missed a function call, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. What do we do? Well, there is something that we can do that actually does search everything down the chain, and that's in, well, it's actually part of the game object, I suppose. It's get component in children. This will look for the component in all of our children, not just the direct ones. But that only searches for components. So what if we put a special type of component on this FirePoint and search for that? Well, that would work. Now, what do we want to call this component? Well, I'm going to think ahead a little bit, and I'm going to call it weapon data. Okay, there's a weapon data component on the FirePoint now. We're going to go ahead and apply these changes. And now if we do something, get component in children, FirePoint, or sorry, weapon data. So this will return a component. So this will be weapon data WD is equal to this, for example. And then we can do something like weapon data.transform.position. Let's give this a test to see if this actually works out. And we'll explain a little bit as to why I decided to name it that way. So again, I applied my changes to the prefab, then I'm going to delete this instance of it, since it's not actually the one we spawn in for real. I'm going to hit play. So I got my character, now I'm going to shoot, and we are successfully shooting out of our gun. You can see the little sound effect thing because the audio source spawns in nice at some point. Look at that! Pretty freaking awesome, right? Ooh, should remove this debug log because printing something every frame is really slow. If ever you end up printing something to the log every single frame, you will notice your performance in your program come to a screeching halt. So we definitely want to get rid of that. Plus, you know, it's obviously not useful anymore. So we're successfully shooting out of our hand. So why did I decide to call this weapon data? Well, right now, and once again, do this, pull in my player controller. Right now, our weapon damage and reload time, or the fire rate, is based on the player shooting script. But that belongs to the player itself. Obviously, if we switch weapons, we want to have completely different fire rate and damage numbers, right? So what if that data became part of weapon data instead? Picking up what I'm putting down? Let's go into the player shooting script. Let's grab the fire rate and cooldown and damage. Actually, just the damage and fire rate, probably. I suppose the cooldown could also be part of the weapon data. You know what? We'll leave it there. That's fine. So let's move this into the weapon data instead. So now player shooting doesn't have any information as to the speed of our weapon, right? Or the damage. So it's if we tab back in, we would, whoops, that was weird. We would get some errors over here because our player shooting script doesn't have a damage parameter anymore. But our weapon data does. So what if, well, obviously we want to use that. Now, what I could do is do another find over here, right? When it's time to apply the damage, I can find the weapon data and just say, oh, weapon data dot damage. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Okay, good. And that would work. But you want to avoid doing these sort of lookups constantly. This everyone in Unity says, oh, this is slow. Now, I don't know how slow it actually is, but it still makes sense that we shouldn't be running this thing constantly. Let's grab this and cache it. So even in here in the gun effects, let us change it. First of all, let's do a rename over here. We're going to call this weapon data. We'll be a little bit more verbose, and we're going to paste that in there, because what I'm going to do is cut this out. We're going to go into our start. We're going to paste this in here. Then I'm going to grab this. So we're going to have a protected data member for our weapon data. We're going to populate it here. We're also going to do a quick check. Debug, if weapon data equals null, debug.log error did not find any weapon data in our children, which is obviously bad. So in fact, in our fire routine, we'll put in another check here that says if weapon data equals null, then we're going to return. We're not going to let anyone shoot if we don't have any weapon data. And maybe that'll happen. Maybe we get disarmed, right? That can happen. Now, obviously, we're grabbing this right now in our start routine. You are going to want to, at some point, add in some functions to allow you to switch weapons. And what switching a weapon will involve, it will involve changing the model that's attached to our player and also refreshing our weapon data. Okay, so we've got that, which is great. Now, our weapon damage here, which is weapon data.damage, and the only other thing that's missing is our cooldown rate, our cooldown, which is reset from our fire rate, which we're going to want to grab from our weapon data as well. So now we should be in exactly the same place we were before. If I hit play, oops, actually, we still have this player controller in here. Let me get rid of that. We hit play, single player, there. Everything works exactly like it was before, but the weapon information in terms of damage and fire rate is actually attached to the weapon. So now we open up the possibility of swapping out the weapon and having completely different gun information. In fact, maybe what we want to do is, instead of grabbing the weapon data in the start, maybe here in the fire routine, if we're trying to fire but we don't have a weapon attached, then here we're going to grab the weapon information. If it's null, still freak out and then return. But what it means is, if we do just swap out the weapon model, which also has the weapon data attached to it, well, when we delete the old one, so if we delete the pistol screen, the pistol model, it'll remove that model from existence. And then if we install a rifle, so at this point it'll come over here, it'll notice the weapon data has become null, at which point it will go looking for another weapon data. And then if it still fails to do it, it'll freak out and then return and not let you shoot. This is still not necessarily the ideal way. We haven't figured out exactly how we want to do the weapon swapping yet, but this is probably slightly more protected. We could put another check in here for do gun effects to make sure that weapon data is valid, but there's actually no way for do gun effect to be called except from inside of fire. So we're actually going to be safe here, but do keep that in mind. If you're a belt and suspender kind of guy, you can put a little bit of protection there. Anyway, so we are very nearly done. The only thing that's not quite in place right now is our arm swing code right now does not synchronize over the network, but we can fix that really, really, really easily. If we go into our, I guess it's our player movement script. No, I'm wrong. Our player controller, obviously we've got the network character script over here. And this is responsible for synchronizing our animations. We're going to do the same thing. So in on photon serialized view, if we are sending, if it actually belongs to us, well, we're going to send a new float, and this one is going to be called aim angle. We're going to send that. And then on the flip side, we're going to receive a float called aim angle, like that. And then right, and it just sets it right away. So on the network, everything should be synchronized. Let's find out. We're going to go ahead and do a, whoops, we have to cast it to a float, not a Boolean. Excellent. We're going to go build settings. Are we set to PC? Yeah, good. So I should be able to do a build and run at this point. And connect two clients to the game. Sure, we'll go at a whopping 1064 by 768. We'll join the multiplayer server. Oh, I should actually update the version number too, otherwise there's going to be some weird glitches if two people from different versions come and happen to join together. So we're going to join in there. And now my characters are standing on top of one another, and if I do this, there we go. Ooh, it's definitely choppy, right? We are not lerping from one position to another. It's just insta-teleporting from one spot to the rest. And we may not want to do that. I say, knowing full well that we don't. But the gunshot does come out of the right place. You can see when we're down at the bottom, the angle of our arm doesn't quite match up, and we can adjust the animation, perhaps, to fix that. Actually, it's probably our thresholds in large part, just to get that to work properly. But you know what? It's not bad. All right, jerkiness, double plus on good. let's look into how we do that. It's actually surprised me. Oh, you know why? It partially surprised me that some of the speed and everything worked out okay. But what we want to do is we want to do a lerp on the aim angle is clearly what we want to do. So instead of setting the float directly, what we're going to do is capture that. So we're going to have a placeholder here, float called real aim angle. And I guess we'll set it to 0. So I'm going to grab this set float over here. I don't want to do that here. I want to copy it. I'm going to move it into our update. So we're going to set the float of aim angle, but we're going to do a lerp. It's going to be a mathf.lerp of a floating point number from, so it's going to go from our current angle, which would be nm.getFloat. I'm not sure that this is particularly fast, but I guess it'll work. GetFloat aim angle. So we're going to get our current one. We know our real aim angle, which is this. And again, we're going to do it over like 10% of a second. So 1/10 of a second is kind of what we're going for this smoothing speed. That'll work there. And then over here, we want, instead of setting the aim angle directly, we want to just capture. I'm clearly missing a parentheses somewhere because something is freaking out on me. Did I miss one here? Oh yeah, definitely. We need another parentheses right there. And oh yeah, and if it's the first update, then we want to do the same thing where we instantly update our actual position to the correct one. Like so. All right, I like it. And while I'm thinking about it in my network manager, I'm going to bump my version number here. We're going to call this version 3. Because our actual network protocol has changed. We are, on every update, we are sending one extra piece of information. We're sending another float, which has to be received. Otherwise, everything will just fall out of sync and be weird. So now let's hit play. Actually, let me start with the standalone version. Play. Multiplayer. Thank you muchly. And then over here, play. Go into multiplayer. We should join the same server again. Good. Let me turn around and face myself. Flip over to here. And now, if I move around, the gun is smoothly animated. And we get sound out of both games at the same time, which is pretty good too. Pew, pew, pew. All right, I'm gonna call that one pretty darn good. Obviously, it'd be nice to have a better gun model, but I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader. God, that's such an annoying thing to say. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.